Well, hello everyone, and welcome to the Sunday Shot post-election special. Dave, what a night we had last night.
What a night. Not at all hungover. Very awake and happy to be here talking about politics. But yes, what a night. They kept saying, and Peter Dutton has lost his seat, and it just kept feeling good.
Yeah, it never got old.
Oh,
We're delighted to be joined for this political nerd out this morning by the indomitable Cheryl Kernot, who will have a particular take, I'm sure, on the seat of Dixon, which we will come to imminently. Welcome to the Sunday Shot, Cheryl.
Thank you.
It's fantastic to have you.
And it's a
And we will have the cynical overviews coming from the man from Michael West Media, Michael West himself. Welcome, Michael.
Good to be on the show, Joe.
Now, oh my God, it was a night. I don't even know where to begin with it. And we've got a lot to get through, but I think it's fair to say that the absolute shellacking, the scale of Labor's victory was a surprise. Cheryl, what was your first takeout from last night's results?
yes, yes, it was a surprise. I don't know what Liberal internal polling was telling them. Some of them looked shell-shocked to me. Um, but I was really happy that Australians, because I wasn't sure what was going to happen, I was really happy that they rejected all that culture war
Yeah.
politics that's
uh-huh.
dominated our media for too long, just far too long. And the subtext of that is they repudiated the Murdoch part of that.
hmm
Well,
And I
I
was
think that's the other part of the
delighted.
story.
And
Yeah.
wasn't it so nice to see on the ABC coverage, and we will criticize them a bit later, but that Laura Tingle was addressing that very directly to Jim Chalmers and said, "Can we play a different game? People are so sick of this shit."
Yes. Yeah, I agree. So I was happy about that. I was a bit disappointed for the community independents
Yeah.
because I think they play a very constructive role, and if they had been in a position of more balance of power position,
Mm.
I think Labor would have been happy to have been pushed, but uh, they're not really in the position to do that now. So I hope Labor doesn't misinterpret the result
They
because
will.
I'm
No,
sure they
that's what the
will.
Labour Party does.
oh
Um,
well, we're stuck with AUKUS if they do.
Because
yeah,
And
well,
I also think that Australians, no matter what some analysts say, we did sort of recoil from the Trumpism
mm,
overarching spectre. I don't think it was the only thing, but it was definitely there. And finally, I would say the stark contrast between the competence of Labor's team, not just the campaign team, but the front bench. How could you compare a
mm.
Chalmers and Gallagher with a Taylor and Hume? I mean, in the last week, that was disastrous for the Libs, and they thought they could get away with it, I think.
I think they did, and we're going to dive into each of the implications for each of the parties and the sectors, including the community independence, because I think it is fair to say it was probably it was a disappointing night for them in some ways, although there are still a few seats in play where the AEC did the wrong preference count originally. So there's yet votes to be counted there. But Michael, your overall takeout. On last night before we dive into the now very much dead entrails.
Joe, I think Peter Dutton lost as much as Albo won, although it was such an emphatic victory and it sort of confirmed how, Albo's political instincts to go to the centre. I mean, he's naturally of the left, but he's gone to the centre. He knows what the Australians vote from the centre. Independence up 4.5%, I thought. That was further vindication of the two parties. There's something wrong with the two-party system. So overall, we got a third, coalition, Labor and independence. That trend is now set. The Teals are set. They're not a one-hit wonder. It's corroborated how good they've been as representing their own communities. All the wealthy seats and so on. But your point, I think, Cheryl, that overall, that is Albo going to use this emphatic victory for good, for some progressive reform, for some vision rather than just tweaking around various policies at the edges. That's going to be seen, yet to be seen. And but Liberals, yeah, some soul searching to do there. They've gone to the right. As one of you guys said, it's a repudiation of Murdoch because he barracked so hard for the coalition, the Murdoch media, and the Greens went nowhere. They were smeared heavily. There's a lot of dark money smearing the Greens, fossil fuel money and so forth. So that was disappointing for them. But I think overall a positive result, unless, as Dave, you pointed out, they don't use it for real reform. If they don't start attacking the systemic issues, and they don't, there's no evidence they will, unfortunately. There's a lot of money in politics, and those electoral reforms last year, which cement the duopoly, are a real problem. So who knows? If they don't do enough, there'll be a Teal Labor movement. So,
I just want to touch on the dark money against the Greens. I walked around. I think I went to 5 polling places yesterday, and obviously everyone's advertising for themselves. But in terms of the anti-attack ads on billboards and fences, there was so much stuff by Advance attacking the Greens directly, almost as much as any other single political party had, which I think is a sign that their policies are basically on the money and they're targeting the right people, like the people that are capturing politics. But yeah, that was very, very interesting.
And the Liberal Party themselves were funding Advance in order to facilitate those very attack ads. So it is this sort of the way the money sort of washes through to allow a bit of distance between the major parties or in this case, particularly the Liberal Party, and these really kind of pernicious and, nasty ads that were going. But, I mean, pernicious and nasty is probably 2 good words for the Liberal Party in its current form under Peter Dutton. Cheryl, Dixon was your old seat, and I think we all dared to hope, but none of us, I must say, I did not really think that Peter Dutton would lose his seat.
No, 24 years is a long time to wait, I can tell you that. And they kept returning him, and the boundaries did change a little bit, but not to the effect that it would have really hurt his vote. So I was like you, I was thinking, this is not looking good for him, but he's come back before.
Yeah.
And it's been close, and I only won it by 176 votes. So, but when I won it, we didn't have the massive pre-poll that happened, and we had massive postal votes then. And there was no way, when they started looking at the pre-polls in Dixon, there was no way he could come back. And so I was allowing myself to believe that it was really going to happen. And gosh, you couldn't get a greater contrast than the Peter Dutton and the empathetic Ali France, whose own life experience has been so challenging, and she's managed to have 3 goes at it, and I'm delighted for her. I mean, the loss of her son.
I know.
The loss of her leg. I mean, how many politicians bring that kind of lived experience to our parliament these days?
Well, Peter Dutton has a very different lived experience. He's been a cop, a property
Potentially.
tycoon, and a
Yeah.
racist politician.
Yeah.
Like, those are they're probably the 3 worst things. I'm surprised it took this long for him to get the resounding boot, to be honest.
No. Queensland likes, we have a different, well, I'm not there anymore, but there's a different relationship with authoritarianism. I mean, Joe was there for so long. There's a different relationship in Queensland. And being a cop, even though it was only 10 years, that's like, feather in your cap.
It's a different perspective from Victoria, I suppose.
Yeah. I mean, I think it is extraordinary that here we had Peter Dutton, who was the LNP leader, who had tried to kind of forge the party into his own likeness.
Exactly.
And
The
then
LNP likeness.
exactly. And then it was repudiated throughout Queensland, which hitherto had really been kind of a bulwark for
Exactly.
the right wing parties. Michael, I see you consulting your phone there and getting some results, but Queensland, that was unexpected. I think the extent of the swing in Queensland.
Well, I agree. I mean, you're going to tell me they thought they would lose Petrie? I don't believe that.
No.
No. But
And I
I
think-
think Michael, you're waiting for Michael?
Well, I was waiting for Michael, but he's looking a little bit distracted there.
I'm sorry, I'm just checking up that people are harassing me on the mobile phone. There's a beeping in the background. I'm terribly sorry about that.
That's right.
Yeah, I mean, there was some surprises there, no doubt. And as you say, Joe, there's still a couple to come in Fremantle, but it was a rout. I mean, 11% swing to last time I looked to Ali France away from Dutton. It's dramatic, very dramatic, but it really, it just, the Liberal Party now has to really, if they want to survive, they're going to have to really start, moving away from the Murdoch position, because all the moderates have gone. And my take on it really is that Australians, we talk about AUKUS and various things which are incredibly important, but really people vote on hip pocket mostly. And I think there wasn't anything that I was particularly attracted to in housing policies and cost of living things. It was all a bit itsy bitsy. But, that I think probably economic management, Labor proved to be sound, if not spectacular, economic managers, and people felt more comfortable. As a repudiation of Peter Dutton as a person, as you say, Cheryl, the culture war stuff, it just goes on and on and on. And I think Aussies just aren't buying it. We're not Americans. And this whole war on woke thing, I mean, what is woke, It's just...
Michael, this stuff's clearly coming. It's a push from the far right. Why have we been slightly more resistant to succumbing to this bullshit? Is it at higher levels of education and media literacy?
Well, I think there is greater media literacy by the younger demographics who are voting in increasing numbers at this election. And I think the young people there's a rising distrust generally in institutions, Dave, whether they be political or corporate or whatever, and that's a problem for all of society. And social media and so on, there are other narratives out there and people are feeding on them. And the mainstream media loss of control issue will play bigger in this next 3 years. Because they control the 24-hour news cycle by leaking to the gallery and then, controlling what happens on breakfast TV and radio and so on. That has to be challenged, surely, this year with the proliferation of social media. But it will be interesting. I just think people in the end just went, well, Albo's, he's more authentic, and Australians can pick that up. I think authenticity. I mean, Donald Trump. I mean, we recall in horror. It was only 6 weeks ago that Dutton was leading in the polls. And then you saw it all start to blow out. Sports bet odds. Last time I checked last night were 950 against the coalition. So the books picked it. The Resolve poll picked it 84 seats, although they're looking 4 short at the moment on the landslide perspective. But I think there's an element of Australians picking up authenticity, which you don't get in the US. We couldn't have a demagogue like Trump here because higher education, also the Australian culture of, I think, being sick of that, war on woke, culture wars, xenophobia and so on. All those things conspired to give Albo, I think people just went, well, he's not perfect, but he's better than the rest, and we don't want Dutton coming in. So the Libs actually lost it. And that slide in the polls was incredible. And I think when Trump got in and did his bizarre tariff trade war, and the markets went south and so on, people, and all the stuff he's doing, locking up people for free speech, sending them to El Salvador, all these things, people are picking this stuff up, particularly the younger demographics, and going, well, these guys have tied themselves a bit to the Trump bandwagon. And, Jacinta Price's make Australia great again comments, those sort of things didn't help. So that, what could have been a virtue for them, politically at least, strategic terms, turned into a nightmare for them as the chaotic Trump administration sort of soldiered on. And I think that lost them a lot of votes because he was ahead in the polls literally a few weeks ago. And then it just They made bad strategic decisions, and nuclear was never fair dinkum. That went as a. I mean, when you think about the size of that, unfunded, 600 billion is light. You know, we've got serious analysts out there saying trillions, and nobody bothered. The press gallery sort of, oh well, let's not bother asking too much about it.
Yeah.
As to the details of how they got to this puny 331 million and nuclear, you know, it just didn't stack up, and I think people saw through that.
Well, I think that is the thing. I mean, I think there's a lot going on there in terms of the coalition campaign. I think you're right that there were George Begler-Jennis was talking about this the other week. Is that when there were external factors at play in these last sort of few months, they all broke Labor's way in a way that they potentially hadn't been throughout the course of last year when global inflation was taking hold, and there was limited really policy levers that Labor could reach for then. So they were going against Labor. But this time we had Trump and the chaos that was unleashed after his inauguration. Then you had, the election being able to be delayed until after what then became the interest rate cut because of ex-cyclone Alfred. And then in the middle of it all, you had the Pope dying, which enabled Albo to look again sort of authentic and emotional and, like a leader, and sucked out more energy from the coalition's campaign. But it wasn't just the external factors, and it wasn't just sort of Timu Trump, I don't think. I think it was very much that the coalition just really had not done the work that they needed to do, had not learned the lessons of 2022, had learned the wrong lessons from the victory in the referendum, the voice referendum, and thought they could kind of coast in on kind of grievance and arrogance.
Isn't this to do with the ideology in that party that they're inherently against governments doing stuff, so they don't bother to do stuff? Like, it's absurd that they didn't really have policies to come to the election, and it's also absurd that our media class was basically like, this is good enough.
I think one of the big factors that changed was the media suddenly. I mean, it's only taken them 24 years, but to actually put the blowtorch on Peter Dutton. I mean, how could he be for 24 years, be in ministries, and still be a big shot in media eyes because they hadn't placed enough scrutiny on him? And so they wait to the election campaign when he's seeking to become Prime Minister to actually pay really close attention to what he's about. I had so many requests for interviews about what's the real Dutton, Peter Dutton, like from my experience 24 years ago. I think they failed spectacularly to hold him to account his entire political career. He's been able to skate through just doing head-kicking comments and without policy, even when he was a minister. And I hold the gallery particularly culpable on that.
And what are they going to do now that they can't say Peter Dutton says for 3
I don't care about them,
years?
but I'm going to rejoice every day. I'm going to turn the TV on safely, I hope.
But that is
Don't
the
worry,
point,
we'll have
isn't
Angus
it?
Taylor says now.
Yeah. Michael, I mean,
That's worse.
That's the point, is that, the doctors, the Medical Association, they voted Dutton the worst health minister ever. When he was Defence Minister, all of the acquisitions were overrunning on their budgets, were behind schedule. When he was Home Affairs Minister, the National Audit Office would go in and just throw up their hands with the chaos that was unleashed and the way that there was corruption entering the visa system. I mean, he seemed to fail upwards at every turn.
It's the media narrative, isn't it? News Corp was still controlling the narrative and doing hero games. I mean, even the Sunday Telly splash a few days out, revealed the softer side of Peter Dutton. I mean, but
Not a monster. He's not a monster guy.
How many
it gets
times
back to
have we
that
been told
authenticity, doesn't it? The authenticity is, I think, does come through eventually. And Cheryl said this escaped attention for a long time, but the problem is policy. They didn't really have policy. They kept on matching, like 8.5 billion Medicare, Labor, bang, 8.5 billion.
Yeah.
$25 scripts, PBS, bang, coalition matches. There was one match on the other side, which was actually the best policy the coalition came out with. Ban foreign residential property buyers to stop, people competing at auction, young people, Australians against foreign investors. Like, that was a good one. And then Labor actually matched that. But I think in the end, their strategy was really very Trumpian. It was, and this is at the bottom of nuclear. I mean, they can't seriously have thought that nuclear was no credible expert thought it was doable within reasonable cost.
No, I mean, nobody did. And he didn't visit a single site. I don't think he got within 50 kilometres of one of the proposed sites.
But he did go to 15 petrol stations.
Yeah, but he was pinged on one in Dixon, and that didn't help.
Doesn't it get to the fact, though, that their strategy was really just image over substance, to make Peter Dutton look bold and to bag Anthony Albanese for being weak and vacillating. And that was their strategy. It was very Trumpian. But unfortunately, Aussies got onto the fact that, there wasn't any substance behind it, because the point of nuclear is that it doesn't matter whether it's ever going to happen. I don't believe they fair dinkum thought nuclear was going to happen. It just does not stack up for this country. But they persisted with it because nuclear sounds strong. It sounds atomic.
And it was a political solution to their internal problems around climate change. I mean, Matt Canavan actually said as much, and you think, Matt, what are you doing? You're not supposed to say that bit out loud.
It's almost an insult to Trump to a degree, and I despise the man, and he does run on these culture war nonsense, and he is seeding hate and fear and division, but he does also have policies. They're horrible policies.
Well, he has executive declarations, but
No, he does. But on the lead up to the election, he told us all the things we were going to do. We chose not to believe him because we're gormless frogs boiling in water. But he did more of that than Dutton did.
That's true. Yeah, I think the nuclear thing was just, as Joe said, it's just a reaction. We've got to have a policy. We've got to have a policy. It's like AUKUS with let's jump in behind, as Labor did. It wasn't serious to start with. And you're right. I think Australians still are savvy enough to know enough of us about Chernobyl, about Fukushima, about, Peter Garrett keeps reminding us about his role in it. And I think we've never accepted that nuclear is the way forward. So I think that was a dud policy from the minute they said it.
Yeah. Can we, before we leave the coalition and talk about what this means for Albanese and his enhanced stature, can we just have a little moment to say, James McGrath, oh my God.
Let's wait for the numbers to come in, Joe. I'm not sure we're ready to go there yet. I'm just going to remind you that the pre-poll will have a different result.
I think he added that to our bingo cards, election night bingo cards. We just now wait for the pre-polls to come in, and I think people were starting to laugh uproariously every time he said it.
The ABC commentary team, we just had to, when Annabelle said, "You're sounding a bit chemical, Ali, here now," I mean, it was absolutely ludicrous. And then, I think, though, if you're going to accept that invitation and be on one of those panels, you have to be prepared to speak the truth about what is actually happening rather than just deal with talking points again and again. And then their one bright spot was apparently Solomon, and he clung on to that, and then Jacinta clung on to that, and actually that's a really solid Labor retain at this point.
And the Brisbane City Council.
Oh, yeah.
And somebody said nobody in Australia apart from Brisbane's heard of the Mayor of Brisbane. So it's not the best thing to cling on to.
So is that where the Liberal...
He would have thought that was a fantastic opportunity for himself, because he has been campaign director in Queensland. He's carved out a kind of Mr. Bigwig role for himself in Queensland. He is one of the worst, ugliest people at Senate estimates. He will say and do anything to make a talking point. And I think he would have had an expectation that he would not have had that experience on the ABC. He would have been happy to go on there.
Well, I mean, he's certainly his reputation as a credible kind of analyst has been tarnished by his carry on last night. I
I
mean,
think he's indicative of the problems that the Liberal Party
Yes.
face. He's
Yeah.
he's very defensive. He's not willing to do any self-reflection. There was no substance there, and he just thought he could string us along for fools. Keep saying we got to wait for the numbers to come in. As the numbers are coming in, and he's being asked to comment on the numbers, we need more numbers. It's absurd.
Well, that's right. I think he's symptomatic of the Liberal Party, which is, I mean, Ted O'Brien too is a lobbyist, as McGrath is, and the authenticity again does not shine through with these guys. They look like sort of backroom sort of operators, and not
They are.
people with any, you know, any vision whatsoever. I think, you know, you've got to, and there's a talent pool deficit going
Yeah.
on in the
Well, let's
Liberal
come to
Party. I
that.
mean, this is the problem. As they look around for their new leader, it looks like it'll probably be Angus. I mean,
It
the
can't be
fact
Angus.
is, I know it sounds
Nice one, Angus.
elitist, but they're just not that bright. These guys,
No, they're
you
not.
know, you know, they're better in the coalition, you know, in the Nats. And if you look at the Teals, who held firmly, and they're not a one-hit wonder. These
Yeah.
are all doctors and journalists and lawyers and people like that. They're accomplished people in their own right. They haven't come up through those political channels of being lobbyists and chiefs of staff and so on. And I think that's coming through now. You know, they've got to have a good look at themselves.
They,
The
but
old
whether or
Liberal
not they
Party.
will, and I think let's talk for a minute about the possible new leader of the Liberal Party. I mean, I guess the good thing in one way for them, with Dutton actually losing his seat, they don't have to have that kind of tussle as to whether or not he's going to try and hang on or
Yeah.
he would shuffle off, exiting stage left. I mean, he's gone. But, I mean, the names that are coming up are, I mean, Angus Taylor, Jim Chalmers was already manoeuvring
That
on
was
the panel
clever.
last night to say he can't possibly, he must take responsibility for this loss too. And frankly, he does need to. I mean, he was a key part of the problem, number 2 after Dutton. The idea that he could be leader just seems ludicrous to me.
Well, I agree. I mean, but there's that silly old script in politics, which is if you've had the heavy portfolio of treasury, you're entitled to have a go at being leader. Which and so that so many of them aspire to that old script still, because so Andrew Hastie was the one who got a swing to him, didn't he?
See, I think Andrew Hastie, I've actually put money on Andrew Hastie.
Yeah.
I think he's the only credible one.
Yeah, he's also very fundamentalist, right wing,
Sure,
and the rest.
sure.
So I'm not quite sure where he will lead them.
David Spears asked Dan Tehan if he'd have a crack last night, which again it points to the glut of talent they have in that
Yeah.
party, doesn't it?
Yeah, you know, Angus though, if Angus does get up, he's going to absolutely get carved up by Jim Chalmers every
Yes.
day in Parliament and the House.
Yep.
You know, there's just such a mismatch going on there. And Angus actually, he does have that sort of boy next door, familiar. He looks nice, and he looks like a nice guy, frankly. But there's a lot of, you know, family making money out of politics. There's money there.
Yeah,
And
well,
what's
him
going to
making
happen?
money out of politics.
What's going to happen when he gets up and somebody asks, well, who actually got that $80 million from that
Yeah,
from
the
Barnaby's
Watergate.
department for that water deal? Because, you know, Labor, they're in government now. They could go and get the directions to pay from the water department and find out whose bank accounts that money went
Why
into
don't they?
in
We
the
want to
Cayman
know.
Islands.
don't
Well,
they?
they don't, because they protect each other. Cheryl would know better than myself, but
Yeah, they do protect each other. They don't
protect
want
each
they
other.
don't want tit for tat to uncover their own
no,
skeletons.
and there would be tit for tat because Labor held, you know, I think it was Penny held the water portfolio before Barnaby came in. But where did that money go? They can find that out because they are in government, but they have refused to do that. So that's you know, that's too much of a risk in my view for the Libs to go in with going, well, $80 million was paid to a Cayman Island company, was set up by Angus Taylor.
Yeah.
Where did it go? If any of his mates got that money, we're not saying they did, there were any mates, but he set the company up, so he would know who the shareholders are.
It isn't
And
it
we can
funny?
find out, or the Labor Party can find out in government who those shareholders are, who got the money. So surely that's a risk for them.
Isn't
Sure.
it a failure of accountability that has never been, excuse me, properly followed up by media, by investigative journalism?
100%.
That all
You
happened
get
through
to a
the
dead end.
independent
That's the
media.
problem. We had a good crack at it, but
Yeah.
Yes.
because of secrecy in the Cayman Islands, you can't find out who even the directors of a company are, let alone shareholders. But we know that Angus established it. And so it's fair to think if you're establishing a company, you're going to know who the shareholders are. But if you've got trust companies, if you've got trusts and you've got nominees and all this sort of thing, you know, you can hide
Yeah.
the
I think Michael and
beneficiaries.
Cheryl are right here because it's also, I mean, there are reasons why the Labor Party doesn't want an effective corruption commission. There are reasons why the Labor Party doesn't want truth in political advertising laws.
Yeah.
They want to be able to lie as well because they think they're as good or better at it as the coalition.
Or they
They are
don't want to
better
give
at it.
away the advantage. It's not about definitely want to lie, but they don't want to give away the opportunity to do it if they need to. So it is
I
about
mean,
cementing the duopoly, even though it's, as Michael said, it's now 30, 30, 30. It's still going to take a few elections to actually try and unwind some of that. And those new electoral laws, they're evil.
They
they
are.
are.
And I think they were specifically, as Don Farrell said, designed to try and protect the duopoly. I mean, let's come, perhaps before we go on to Labor, let's just talk about the independents for a minute. So I wonder, given that they're at the moment, what we have is Bradfield having fallen, but really in a way that's sort of replacing the abolition of North Sydney. So we're still
Yeah.
basically at status quo in terms of numbers. There are some interesting battles still going on, and the AEC didn't always pick the final two. So we don't yet know what's going to happen in seats like Calare and Monash, which were interesting because that's where they had an incumbent coalition member, and Russell Broadbent in Monash for the Libs, and Andrew G, who, you know, did the right thing and resigned from the Nats over the Voice referendum. So they were both running again. Andrew G much more successfully, it looks like, than Russell Broadbent. But because there are two independents plus two majors, the way that the preferences are going to spray is really unknown. And both Kate Hook and Deb Leonard are still in with a shot.
Yeah.
So we can't yet say there will be no net gains from Teals, to use a shorthand, which I know not all of them like. But it's not the sort of, with Kaz Heiss now looking very unlikely. In fact, just before we came on air, that was pretty much called for the Nats, and that's unfortunate. And also Wannon, Dan Tian's seat was, I think, a disappointment. Looks like Alex Dyson, well, he's gone backwards there on his third attempt, and that's surprising actually, because there was a lot of talk on the ground that he may be able to take that. The other independent, where there's perhaps still a little bit of account to follow, is the seat of Flinders, where Zoe McKenzie is only ahead by 102 votes just before we came to air. I don't know if that's been updated since. We were down there for the Sorrento Writers Festival just last weekend. There were sort of mixed views about Ben Smith's chances. There had been a few sort of schisms around pre-selections and that kind of thing, so it hadn't been smooth running, but everyone had fallen in behind him. But still, the view was that Mackenzie would probably hang on. That's still in play. But if we do have status quo or a net gain of only one or two, it's certainly not a big sweep. Not to underestimate the achievement of the incumbents to all hang on as they have.
Yeah.
But my question to you both, Michael and Cheryl, do you think that actually the Teal phenomenon is really much more, as you alluded to, Michael, a structural problem with the Liberal Party rather than the kind of broad-based community movement that there were hopes it may portend?
Do you want to go?
That's
Well,
I'm
Cheryl,
throwing
you
that out
go.
there. That was a big
Yeah.
intro, long question. What do you think, Cheryl?
Well,
You go first.
it is structural problems with the Liberal Party, except when you look at Cowper and Bean and Fremantle. I think
Fremantle is another one. Yep.
I think it gives you an indication that there's still that movement there that Australians will vote for a good independent, and maybe the first go mightn't be enough. I think there is still a movement there in Australia away from the duopoly, despite Labor having won. I think on the ground and in specific seats, there is room to grow, but it's going to take a lot of work. And I hope some of those go back again for a second and a third time because it shows you what can be done. But the structural problem with the Liberal Party in pincer moving out all those people who would be small L Liberals, I don't think that's going to change in a hurry because most of the people who are left were happy for Dutton and his senior team to engage in the kind of campaign that they did. They happily played along. They're the ones that are left. There's no new influx of talent. And so I think there's an opportunity for community independence to keep going, to keep their on the ground campaigns going. I think Nicolette was very clever being a shadow member. I think that's a fabulous strategy that I'd like to see others adopt. So Kaz Heiss, for example. So that's not a structural problem with the Liberal Party in Cowper. It's the declining, what would you say, lack of good representation from the Nats and the changing demographics of the seat. So I think across Australia there will be good seats, and I think Climate 200 did a pretty good job of identifying many of them.
Yep.
And it gives me hope that if people have the energy, they
And
can
the
keep going.
capacity, of
And the
course,
capacity,
because
which
you know,
is
to
the
be a
important-
shadow member, you have to basically
Yeah,
take 3 years out of your professional
yeah,
life
that's
on a
true.
wing and a prayer.
That's true.
I think we should talk about the Australian Greens as well a little bit before we
Yeah,
move on to the Labor Party
No,
because
no, no. We
we
definitely will
haven't
come
finished.
to the
they
Greens.
they seem their primary vote seems to be stuck at between 11 and 13% of Australia. And they ran a pretty good campaign this year. They were all over TikTok. Youth was quite engaged. They came very close in Wills. It looks like Samantha Ratnam got a higher primary vote than Peter Wills. The Palestinian community got really behind this seat, but it looks like they've just fallen short.
Well, I think that is true. Well, let's, unless, Michael, you have anything you want to say further on the Teals, let's have a little chat about the Greens. And I also want to talk about the Muslim independent candidates in Blaxland and Watson particularly. So, Michael, any final thoughts on structural problems with the Libs and any independents still hoping
Well,
to...
I think if you look at what the Teal, I mean, they were competent, all of them almost. They were competent. Yeah, they were a bit muzzled on Gaza, but on women, integrity in politics, and climate, they're all very strong. They represented their communities. That's what their communities wanted. As I always sling off at them a bit and say, save the planet and save our franking credits. But these, they are the representing the 9 wealthiest electorates in the country, and so they are representing their constituents, and that is democracy working. Whether it can work in out of suburban seats and so on, we'll find out probably in this term, because if Labor do not seize the mantle now and govern for all Australians rather than just corporations. I mean, this is the annoying thing about election campaigns. They're all falling over themselves to throw the kitchen sink at voters, the people that actually vote them in, 4 weeks before the big day. And they're ruling for corporations the rest of the time because that's where they get their funding. Yeah. And so I think money in politics is a terrible problem. And these electoral reforms, as you said, Cheryl, are really very dangerous, because if they've got an $80 million cap, the 2 majors, they can just shift that money around to their marginal seats, which the Teals and other independents can't do. They can't be shifting their money around where they think it can be best spent. They can a little bit, but not much, because they're capped. Yeah. So, but I think it's a confirmation of it goes to political integrity too, because they're more authentic than the major parties who have to adhere to the party line, and that there is an issue with the NAC. It is They haven't had one public hearing yet. They're completely useless. The guy who's running it should not be there.
No.
It should never have had that exceptional circumstances
Yeah, well,
clause
that was to
inserted at the
reinstate a
last minute.
dozen.
It was.
Yep,
That was
yeah,
just to appease. That was Albo's absolute preoccupation with bipartisanship, which
Yep.
has given us really crap outcomes like that. Could I say one thing about Climate 200's money while we're talking about money? I thought it was really irksome the way the media
Could not agree more.
inferred that Simon Hack's attempts and all the money to Climate 200 was from him, not crowdfunded, and also it was kind of really bad money because it was inferred that he still had, like the old script, that if you give money you have influence, and no amount of pointing out the evidence could sway, particularly the ABC, who did several stories going, oh, X has spent this amount of money and Climate 200 has given this candidate this amount of money, without the slightest recognition context of how much money the major parties spend.
I mean,
because we don't know how much they spend on each seat, but somehow Climate 200 candidates had to wear some sort of opprobrium for spending anything.
And the billionaire tag. I mean, who knows if he's a billionaire? You know,
well, I suspect he isn't a billionaire, but it is to that point. Like a few $1 million that Climate 200 had crowdsourced and then distributed across the country versus the millions and millions that the majors spend and get from all sorts of vested interests who do want a quid pro quo. I mean, not quite literally, but in broad terms. I mean, it was a ridiculous media story, which, you know, just never seems to die, regardless of how emphatically it is actually definitively refuted.
And Clive
And
Palmer's
no kudos for real-time transparency.
No.
Just sort of ignoring it. We don't know what the others are doing.
Yeah.
But somehow this is terrible what Simon Hack's doing.
It's
No.
as though the transparency is making it harder for them, whereas
Yeah.
no one else is declaring. And also,
Yes,
while we're
exactly.
worried about big money interfering, the Clive Palmer last time around spent $117 million on ads. I'm sure he spent more this time around. No one seems to give a shit about that. They're happy to take the ads.
Yeah.
But
It's
the
a tax
Greens,
deduction for him.
the Greens probably didn't get the result that they were hoping last night. Although, as you say, Dave, their primary vote has actually, across the country, has actually gone up a little more. It looks like in the Senate, which we haven't had much time to talk about, but probably looks like it's going to be status quo. With Sarah Hanson-Young returned in South Australia, Jackie Lambie network not doing as well outside of Tasmania or indeed at all. But it looks like Jackie will be returned in Tasmania. But
not Rex Patrick, which I think
not
is.
Rex
I think
Patrick,
every
and
Senate needs a warrior like
they
Rex.
do.
I've got mixed feelings about that because I've had a good 3 years with Rex. You know, the guy's an FOI.
Yeah.
He's got an FOI fetish, does them night and day. And I love it. It gives us brilliant, fresh content all the time. And he's a beautiful writer, funnily enough, for a bloke that spent a part of his life in a submarine.
Yes.
And, so he's been terrific. And transparency, I know it's boring, you know, transparency
necessary.
and disclosure and all this kind of stuff, but it is so important because in a democracy, you can only vote for what you know about, you know, and he shines light on a lot of public interest places, and it doesn't look like at this point he's getting up. I mean, with the preference count still got to be done, but he needs, what is it? You've got to get 14.8% or something.
No. If you get around 9%, and you've got the right preference flow, you're in with a chance.
Yeah. Okay.
But he hasn't. He's not near that. But honestly, the preference flows will be quite complicated.
They will be complicated. And there was a number of really great candidates, you know, Fiona Patten down in Victoria, who was standing for legalised cannabis after a very successful career in the Legislative Council for the Reason Party.
Actually did okay, that party. I mean, they're a bit of a springboard for having another go, in my opinion. But I think it's good that Pauline Hanson's daughter wasn't elected.
She was not elected. Malcolm Roberts will be returned in Queensland. There is, I think, WA, the Labor may well take a seat off the coalition, but is fighting it out with One Nation. But that was David Vann's old seat. But overall, the Greens seem to have lost at least 2 of their lower house seats.
I think losing Max Chandler Mather is a bit of a loss for them. I know he's a
Yeah.
divisive figure, but he's a very good communicator, and he pisses the right people off.
He does.
Yeah.
Do you know what I think? I think so. The Democrats, our vote always stabilised at 13-14%. Was really hard to get above that in the Senate. That's the duopoly effect that
Yeah.
people vote differently in the Senate, but not enough of them. I think, having been a centrist, left of centre Democrat and negotiating, the majority of people don't like a Chandler Mather jumping out of his box too much. There's a certain tolerance that Australians will give, and they don't like a smart ass, which Labor successfully painted Chandler Mather as. And secondly, they also don't like a party holding up what is even not, well, can be portrayed as reasonable legislation, could have been heaps better, but they don't like them obstructing it for a year. Australians, my experience is Australians don't like that. I've been berated in airport lounges and all sorts of places in the past for that, even though never held up anything for a year. And I just think instinctively Australians react to that.
I think that's very true. I also think, though, as the stuff that Max is talking about continues to not get resolved and to get worse, there will probably be a bit more tolerance for direct shit stirring in the parliament.
Oh, no, you need it. I'm not saying you don't need it. I think you need it. But I think Australians have a sort of, okay, that's gone too far now. This is sort of take no prisoners, gone too far. What about the rest of us? And I think with Max, I was ready for the renters subtext to be a lot stronger than it was across the board for the Greens, and it wasn't.
That's a vote winner for the Greens. I'm surprised that wasn't the loudest thing. Yeah.
I think they were smeared so heavily, though. I mean, there was one mob. There was Wendy Bacon and Yakov Ahara, and we did a story last week on there's one astroturfing group pretending to be a grassroots community mums and dads outfit, funded by Zionists and fossil fuel interests. That basically they were Liberal and Labor were holding hands in that one to attack the Greens and the Teals. So, and there was another one we found, was a Better Australia or something like that, one of those anodyne names.
I came across those people too. Yeah.
Who basically were putting out, videos on Instagram and so on, claiming that the Greens were hell-bent on turning Australia into an Islamic caliphate, and so, I mean, Islamic caliphate, the Greens,
Why not?
Harnessing the anti-Semitism thing, which really didn't work because anti-Semitism as an issue went into witness protection during the campaign with the business lobby, and the nuclear. So,
I think Albo's strategy of demonising the Greens worked. Not for the Greens' heartland and their base, and people who might have thought, well, I want to send a message to Labor by voting Green won. But I think for all of those other people who were just kind of trying to decide what to do, I think he made a strategic choice to take them on in a way that no other Labor leader has over a whole term. It's natural for the Greens and Labor to compete, but he made it seem as though they had no right to
delegitimise them as actually.
Yes, I think, and I was really surprised that it seems to have paid off for him. So I think he'll get accolades for that in the caucus when it meets.
I think he will too. And it does seem, though, despite a scare last night, that Adam Bandt will hold his seat. And they'll hold one of their Queensland seats as well. But not pick up. There was talk about Richmond, obviously, Wills, and even McNamara, but none of that will happen. Before we go on to just talk about Albo and what it means for his next term for the last section of the show, can we just quickly touch on, I think, the quite creditable results of the Muslim independent candidates, Oof in Blaxland, Baszioni and Watson, 21% and 15.3% respectively, and came down to the final two for
Yes,
a first crack, and to put Labor on their toes there. I think that was a pretty good result for them.
absolutely.
That's impressive.
That is every 1%
Mm.
is an amazing achievement. First go, that I tips my hat to them, and I
Yeah.
think I'm glad it happened. I'm very disappointed with Labor's lack of action in a articulate vocal sense, like on Gaza and
Yep.
what's happening to the Palestinian people in front of our eyes, even if it is an election campaign. It's been going on for the year, and it's a pity that it wasn't just a little bit closer so that they were really, really worrying about their seats. Um, Good
But I
on.
think it is just that thing, like knowing what it takes to, as you
Oh,
certainly do, Cheryl, to run a campaign
on the ground.
federally, to do well. They did it without any infrastructure, without any kind of. There's no familiarity with independent candidates out in those seats to date. Daly, just note, will
Mm,
hold on to her
mm,
seat.
mm.
Um, so unfortunate what happened there, because Teal was such a stunning candidate. If they
Yes,
had put her up last time,
yes.
anyway, that's by the way. But so it really is an achievement, and that on which they can build if they choose to.
Yeah, and because you've got to have people to hand out how to vote cards for those who don't know what they're doing, still in Australia.
Mm.
And getting that infrastructure on the ground is a huge coordinating effort. So I really think that they might be disappointed they didn't win, but honestly, to achieve 21%,
Mm.
that's extraordinary.
It is extraordinary. That was in Blaxland. So, and some funding will flow from that too. So it'll be
Yeah,
interesting to watch and
yeah.
see what happens there. But in the last few minutes of the show, let's think about what an Albanese second term may or may not look like. There is no doubt. We all agree that, it was one of the worst coalition campaigns we've ever seen. But it is nonetheless still an extraordinary achievement of Albanese to have taken his government to an increased majority of this scale after what we saw coming into this year, which was, a government potentially on the ropes, as Miles said last night. In terms of winning a second term, there's sort of been Whitlam and there's Hawke and now there's Albo. So he does have a great opportunity. What do you think he's going to do with it, Michael?
Well, unfortunately, I'm cynical about the money in politics, as mentioned before, Joe. And I think in the end, I think Albo's intentions are good. I think he's probably a good guy. He is a brilliant politician. There's no doubt about that. That's what this shows, that his strategy to go to the middle, to appeal to middle Australia and to be authentic as much as he could, has been vindicated now with this result. I mean, the swing and the cost of living crisis, because 30% of Australians are doing it really tough, and you need more disposable income than ever to buy a home and that kind of thing. Renters are really doing it tough. I think all those circumstances show what a great result it is, albeit he was aided by Dutton because they made so many backflips and blunders, and the Trump thing didn't work for them. So, it's as much a Liberal loss as an Albo victory, but it does vindicate him. So he has this mandate now. He will be very powerful within the party
Yeah.
Yep.
with this 13 seat. Is that the latest? We're up 13 for Labor, are we?
Yeah,
Something like
something like
that.
that.
So that's astonishing. It's a great mandate for him to do this. Now, can he do it when it comes to the political reality of the people that he hobnobs with and all the lobbyists and the US military and the White House crew and the world leaders and everything like that? Does he just do what human nature does and stays in power and manages that, or does he use it to deliver some visionary reform, some actual systemic change, which Australia needs, because frankly, on all the metrics, it's become a more unfair society. So I don't think, I'm cynical. We had this conversation last night. I'm cynical about that because in the end, there's so much money in fossil fuels. Their approvals are on the rise. They have been for 3 years. They dropped off a cliff, fossil fuel new project approvals, after ScoMo was thrown out. And then they've been growing ever since, with Barossa, the biggest, dirtiest gas project in Australia, which is all going to go to export. You know, it's not going to benefit Australians much. So, you know, I'm cynical because I just think the money and the vested interests are going to be difficult for him to resist. I certainly hope he does do some more visionary. I mean, they can do it. All the policy settings are there if they want to. If they want to build more houses to fix the supply side of housing affordability, because this is the biggest issue for Australians. For, you know, 2/3 of Australians own their own home, amazingly. So that really means that it's a safe bet to just govern for them, and which is what we've seen so far. But they could fix the supply side by just setting up a land bank and forgetting the neoliberal nonsense and just building houses themselves. They can do this sort of thing. They can get rid of capital gains tax relief and negative gearing, or restrict it to one house, a holiday house or something like that. They can fix the Airbnb tax fraud overnight by simply tweaking the tax system to make sure that people don't use it as a tax shelter. There's so many things that they can do that they haven't done, and that they've mooted a little bit, and then the minute they do a bit of they do a bit of polling, they backflip on it, and we're not going to touch capital gains, we're not going to touch it. They've stopped the foreign residential money for 2 years, which isn't enough. They've got to address that. But I think in the end, they won't use this leverage for visionary reform until we get more independence and the two-party system is brought down. So the next term will be critical for that, as the younger demographics, more younger people come on the electoral rolls.
It is kind of crazy because when the right gets in, they just go for it. I mean, we're just seeing what's happening in the US. There's no niceties there. It's like, here's our agenda, we're implementing it, and we don't care. And you know, the left do have an opportunity to implement an agenda which would be embraced, particularly by the young voters coming up. Cheryl?
They just
When I was first elected to Dixon and the Liberals hadn't changed the fax numbers, I got a fax from John Howard telling me, now that we're in, we are going to eke out and seek out every little Labor person in every little nondescript position on every committee and replace them. And they did. And you're right. They just go gung-ho and they don't care about what anyone says. And yet I think I agree with most of what Michael said, but I think there's two things I want to know. What's he going to do with Tanya Plibersek's portfolio? Is he going to try and humiliate her again for, I think, very personal reasons, overriding her? Is he going to put her in that portfolio to start with? I agree we're going to see fossil fuel money's power, and Labor seems to be hung up on this. If we didn't say it in the election, we aren't going to do it. We can only do what we said in the election. So that doesn't give me much hope for much that is visionary. And yet they have the best opportunity, a second term, to build for a third term on progressive reformist things that Labor used to stand for. So,
and a progressive majority in the Senate, it looks like, broadly speaking.
I hope so. I'm waiting for that. So wouldn't it be wonderful if he interpreted this is a reforming opportunity. I want to be remembered. I want to have that legacy as the Albo that I am capable of being. But I suspect the internal power party will not be used in the right way. The Farrells will still be incredibly powerful.
Dave?
Yeah, I mean, he clearly has an opportunity, but like Cheryl and Michael, I remain incredibly cynical. Perhaps also, like, yes, the system's in place, but also about the man. This is the man that founded the Parliamentary Friends of Palestine, and he hasn't been able to utter the genocide word. Like, that is very unimpressive to me as a human being, not just the systems that he's surrounded by. 3.5 million Australians are in poverty, and we keep hearing that he grew up in council housing. He has a clear run at this. If he doesn't want to be governed by the opposition and the Murdoch press, this is the opportunity. And if he doesn't do that, I think we really have a clear understanding of how useful the duopoly is to the Australian people. I mean, that's basically all I want to say. Also, 4 days ago, this man lied to the press pack about not selling weapons to Israel. He's weasel words about selling components, but no one says IKEA sells furniture components because they get assembled in a different country. It's still furniture. These are still weapons. No one's pushed him on any of this stuff, and I'm not optimistic about the next 3 years, but I would love to be proven wrong. That's where I'll end it.
Well,
I just
Shoebridge,
think, you know,
Shoebridge has been, very strong on that.
Yes.
I mean,
Yes.
thank goodness for Senate estimates,
Yeah, I
because
agree. I
without
think-
Senate estimates, the parliamentary process and the House, the debates, the question time's just not enough. It's too much showmanship involved. We're not getting into the actual questions and responsibility by corporations and government departments. So Senate estimates has been absolutely golden, and it's good to see that the new media, Strangerous and these guys and
Yes.
Squiz
Yeah.
on Twitter and so on, are manicuring this stuff and packaging it up for all of us to see, so we can go, weapons to Israel. I mean, the Israel thing, in my view, is an incredible disgrace, because they could at least do something like expel the Israeli ambassador, or do
Yes.
something significant,
Exactly.
and not use weasel words about weapons parts and so on, because the reality is that Australians have just voted in a party that is contributing to the genocide in Gaza. And as you say, Dave, they can't even bring themselves to use
say the
that
word.
word.
I think the one thing that Albo keeps saying, which is wrong, is no one left behind
Yeah.
when they've done nothing for job seekers this entire time. And that's callous.
That is
Given
callous.
everything we know about cost of living and how hard it is to survive, to just leave job seekers out of the equation in that kind of classic LNP way, I think that's unforgivable, particularly in these times. So he
I've-
can't say leave no one behind, because he is.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think, that is the one thing maybe we can have hope for. I'm not sure that we're going to see the distortions in the housing market through the tax system dealt with, because they were so explicit about that. But maybe in a budget, when you've got such consensus, including the Business Council saying we have to raise the rate, and yet they're still not, seems to me extraordinary. Well, look, it was a momentous night last night. It was a significant election. It will be fascinating to see how some of these last seats fall, which we'll all be keeping our eyes on over the next few hours, days, week. We are going to have a week off next week. I know, no
You
Sunday
deserve it.
shot.
You really deserve it. Thank you
but-
for doing this. It's been very important.
Oh, look,
Thanks,
thank you
Cheryl.
for coming on. Any last quick comments, Michael or Cheryl, before we wind up for the week?
I think we covered the main bases there, Joe.
I
Thanks
think
very
we
much
have.
for
I think we
having me
have.
on, and have a good week off.
Thank
Yes.
you. For those of our viewers out there, do remember to do that like and subscribe thing. If you want to, give us a cup of coffee over our little break next week, also you can go and support us via the Shot website. It's been a hell of a campaign. We've had a great time, and we look forward to seeing you back here on May the 17th. Thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone.
We'll see you soon.
And thanks for Denise pressing the buttons.